In mythology, as well as classic literature and some eras of world history, a golden age is typically accepted as a time period of peacefulness, harmony, stability, and prosperity. Whether it was the height of the Egyptian 4th dynasty during the height of pyramid construction, or 5th century Athens during its peak economic growth and the flourishing of its culture, or examples within the mainstream media culture we have lived in during our lifetimes, we expect the Golden Age to be something akin to a form of utopia. Bringing things into the context of the popular culture we are familiar with, comic experts accept their golden age as beginning in 1938 with the inception of Superman and continuing on for a couple of decades as other golden age characters were established, such as Batman, Wonder Woman, and Captain America. And because I'm something of a wrestling enthusiast, many of my fellow fans accept the golden age of wrestling as the 1980s period that saw the beginning and eventual rise of the early WrestleManias, which also coincided with the rock and wrestling movement, which had Hulk Hogan as its leading character. All of this despite the fact that the origin of wrestling goes back many generations earlier. Now, on a topic that is a little less cut and dry, as action figure collectors, we have to somewhat wonder when the golden age was in our hobby. Different people may have different answers, but after some careful thought, I figured I'd share my own thoughts and opinions on this very subject right here. So let's talk about it. Welcome back to the Toy Connections Action Figure channel. My name's Ken, and I'm your toy enthusiast host for this channel for perpetually however long it goes for. Now, I've raised the question at the beginning here about when is our golden age of action figure collecting? And when I talk about that, I'm specifically referring to action figures. So I'm not talking about Barbie dolls that came a little bit before the action figure era. I'm not talking about Lego, which is more of a building block, or Mr. Potato Head, which is more of a piece it together on his face kind of thing. I'm literally talking about the action figure period in our lives and in our generation and the generation that came before us, and hopefully for however long this hobby and craze goes on for. Now, what really spurned this discussion was a talk that I had with my friends Zazel over from the Sergeant Slaughterhouse YouTube channel and Adam over from Go Figure. You might remember, if you did watch that episode, that I hosted a Talking Connections semi-talk show, not quite a podcast, but you know what I mean. And I raised the question, or I more just almost made the statement that I thought we were in a golden age of action figure collecting right now, and they both kind of shunned me in my response.
Talk a bit about what we got going forward. Are we in the golden age? Because I think we are. I think we're in a new golden age.
Nope.
No.
This here, let this be. This is where we were, right? Collecting toys back in the day, right? The pinnacle, the real golden age of action figures, right? This here is the future of it, right? And what they're doing is they're starting to meet, and eventually the future of the line and the past of the line are going to go. And when that happens, and it's going to happen because each one in this room are going to one day no longer be living in this world. And the people who are supposed to pick it up and move forward with in the future, like our children, aren't going to care about it. There is no future. We are literally the ones collecting it. We're it. Other than that, there's no future for it.
So throughout the last 20 minutes of that discussion, I kind of doubled down and kept going on about how I really thought this was a golden age that we're going through at the time of, well, basically the period that we're in. And, we had a good laugh about it. And, I was coming at it from a perspective of, we have a lot of options now. We have vintage, we have modern, we have high-end product. When I say high-end, I literally mean like very detail-oriented things, whether it's hot toys, whether it's M.A.S.K, whether it's, custom pieces that you either make on your own or you have someone do it yourself, or like fan-made product now that the people from during our childhood, when some of our fellow fans grew up and started making their own toys. And I guess I thought of it that way because one joke that came up is that, Ken, we think you're in the golden age of your action figure collecting right now. And I was like, that's actually very apt. I think that actually makes sense. And upon some further thought, I started to look at it again and like, a lot of this sort of artisan works, this sort of third-party fan maker stuff, and also the rise of all these other toy companies in the sort of post-McFarlane era. You see Super 7, you see NECA, you see Mondo, M.A.S.K that I mentioned earlier. And there's so many, like I can't possibly name everybody out there, but I feel it's more like it's kind of a renaissance period, like a renaissance boom where we're more evolved in our thinking. We're more evolved now in our analysis and insights of the product. Our demands have gotten bigger. Our critical eye has gotten to be a little bit sharper. We compare one figure to another, as I often do, and say, what are the good features of this figure as opposed to that figure, so on and so forth. And I kind of, maybe we are in a golden age. Maybe you can talk to me in the comments and see whether or not you think that that's what we are in. I just started to rethink it after this particular discussion. That's all. So just in looking at the different eras of the action figure boom, the action figure craze, I mean, in 1964 was really when it began with the 12-inch G.I. Joe that came out that year. And throughout the 1960s, like even after that 1964 inception of the 12-inch G.I. Joe, you did get certain toy lines out there like Matt Mason, Man in Space. You did get in the early 70s, the world's greatest superhero with the comic book characters jumping over from the pages of the comics to become toys in a more ready and widely distributed form. Now that's, you could argue that that's more of an extension of the comic, but they are toys, so I guess it does count, right? And then you've also got the Fisher-Price Adventure people that came around in the mid-70s. But I also felt that, a lot of those toy lines, you had a lot of your own personal headcanon, right? Like the media that was out there wasn't all encompassing and all engrossing into the period that I'm about to get into. So I'm just going to go ahead and state that after a lot of thought, talking to some friends and really just analyzing it, more than I thought I would, but I'm also very happy to come to the conclusion and share it with you, is that I really do look at the golden age of action figures being really starting in 1978 with the inception of the Star Wars toys. Yes, I'm aware that the New Hope movie came a year before that. And you can arguably bookend it around 1994, which I'll get to in a bit. So just to qualify that before I jump into the 1978 period onwards, I do know that a lot of people would look at a golden age as being like an inception period where, like I said, the 1964 G.I. Joe and some of the toy lines that came after. But I look at that as truly more of a genesis period. Like you're starting, you're ramping up, you hadn't fully hit that utopia in your mind yet. And I know that a lot of times, like with comics, right? You know, the golden age was the first comics, right? Or at least the first widely produced and distributed comics, right? And with wrestling, what I mentioned earlier, because I never talk about wrestling, right? You know, it had existed for so many decades, even before the accepted golden boom. So I look at, you know, I don't look at this as having to follow the exact path of golden, silver, bronze, modern age. But I'm looking at the golden years kind of in its own standalone period. And in 1978, you know, you got the Star Wars figures. They started being distributed on a very wide level. You know, every kid wanted a Millennium Falcon. Every kid wanted to be Luke Skywalker or Han Solo, or they had to buy a Darth Vader. You know, they had to buy Leia, Chewie, the droids, etc. Right now, full disclosure, I wasn't born until 1982, so I missed a lot of the Star Wars stuff. But just relating the people who did collect Star Wars heavily as a kid, I find that my experiences are very much in line and in parallel with them when I compare it to Transformers, G.I. Joe, a little bit of He-Man when I got into it, a little bit of Ninja Turtles when I got into it. I just felt that, like, you know, I think it was 1980 when they relaxed the regulations on cartoons a little bit, and then that sort of helped the cartoons spawn into toy lines. So then G.I. Joe came back as G.I. Joe, a real American hero. But now, by this period, the sort of different mediums, the comics were plentiful. The cartoons were a daily thing when you came home from school or watched on Saturday morning. You know, it came out in more in-your-face dominance than the 1964 edition of G.I. Joe. You know, the big three of the 80s, when every boy's toy aisle was engulfed by Transformers, G.I. Joe, Masters of the Universe, a little bit of leftover Star Wars stuff. And then as you progress throughout the 80s, you got real Ghostbusters. 1988, you got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and then you have all those sort of mediocre success and somewhat esoteric toy lines such as Captain Power, Cops, M.A.S.K to an extent, Sectars. I know I'm forgetting a lot of toy lines here, and the fact that I can forget this many toy lines while still remember this many toy lines kind of helps with the argument a little bit. And another thing too is that when you look at the TV series on Netflix there, The Toys That Made Us, a lot of the episodes are dominated by these toy lines that I'm talking about. So I do really think that after some careful consideration, that really was the golden boom of the action figure craze. And again, if you have a different opinion, put it in the comments. Do it courteously though, because I'd like to hear your discussion, your argument against if need be, and it's easier to listen to that if it's done courteously. You know, the other thing is that the play sets were just huge at the time, right? A lot of times you just get a single-use mold and you wouldn't have to repaint it 15 different times in order to get a use out of it. Talking about the big stuff, I'm aware that there was a lot of reuse of parts in G.I. Joe and some repainted Transformers. And, you know, other things too is that the movie studios, everything had to have a toy line at the time, whether it was Rambo, whether it was Terminator, whether it was Alien. And I know that a lot of movies still have toy lines today, but you know, a lot of that is the carryover of franchises that we had back then. So I'm kind of differentiating the golden era that I'm talking about with what I've kind of just personally coined as today's Renaissance era, with the more highly articulated, detailed toys that we have today. Now, I know that, as I said at the beginning, that a golden era is more something where you have peace, harmony, prosperity. I forget all the exact words that I used, and I know not everybody was prosperous as a kid. I'm not going to say that I was, but when you went into the toy aisles, you forgot about it. It felt prosperous because you were surrounded by so much color and so much variety. You know, at the time, you know, you didn't necessarily know that He-Man and Transformers and G.I. Joe would be the big sellers of that era. You didn't know that Ninja Turtles would be transcendent from decade to decade. You know, you didn't know that your Kenner Superpowers figures would still matter today. So a lot of times you would look at Captain Power, and in your headset and your mindset at the time, you'd equate that to just whatever was next to it on the toy aisle, whether it was G.I. Joe or something else, right? And it was just that sort of, in my mind, that sort of blissful ignorance where you could just walk in. You felt innocent, the toys were innocent, The toys were simplistic. They were meant to be played with, as my friend Adam had said on that episode that I referred to earlier. They were meant to be played with in your room, in the schoolyard, in the sandbox. You know, today's toys, as gorgeous as they are, we don't do the same thing with them. They have more features, and we use less of those features, at least speaking for me, but I think a lot of you guys can relate in terms of that in terms of that overall feeling. So one of the reasons I said that 1994 for me is largely the bookend year of the golden age or golden era, however you want to coin it, is that, I mean, there's a few reasons, right? First off is that's when G.I. Joe, A Real American Heroes toy line had truly died off and faded off, and there was that official stop before they started up again with something else. I know that there was a big downcline in other toy lines like Playmates' Star Trek. I don't know if they exactly faded out that year because I'm not a Star Trek guy, but I did hear that that was kind of a downcline as well. Transformers, they had Generation 2. It started in 1993 but ended in 95, and from what I remember being in the toy aisles in Canada in that time, they weren't super popular anymore. I mean, they kind of were, but you could see the downcline if you kind of look at it through a slightly retroactive lens. He-Man wasn't popular anymore. Real Ghostbusters wasn't popular anymore. Ninja Turtles had started to deviate from what they originally were and started to go a bit on the downcline. And I'm trying to think of what else was going on around that time in 1994, but you did certainly see, that's what I was going to say. Power Rangers was very popular at the time, but then I noticed that Power Rangers got gradually less popular over the years. Yes, they boomed in 93, also boomed in 94, had their movie in 95, and then I started to see less and less of them on the shelves personally. Now, are they still popular enough to still keep going today? Absolutely, Power Rangers is, just as Transformers is, right? But there was a bit of a transition period there too, where 1994 was also the year that, and I made a slight mistake in my top 10 playsets video. Spawn figures started hitting shelves that year, although the Spawn character had been created in comics a little earlier. I mix that up sometimes. So, you know, with Spawn, you got something of a less idealistic, a bit more flawed character, something, and it kind of led to a bit to the anti-hero rise, right? Like, you know, you did see characters like Deadpool start to show up more in the late 90s. Wolverine, while he'd always been an important comic character, started to get a bit more attention on him with the 1992 X-Men animated cartoon, which of course went on until the mid-late 1990s, and everybody suddenly wanted to be Wolverine. They didn't want to be Captain America anymore. You know, Batman had rolled back into a dark edginess. You know, they didn't want to be Adam West anymore. They wanted to be, well, actually, that's only partially true because it did get a bit campy again in the mid-90s Schumacher Batman film. So maybe that one's a bit of a gray area. But then as you start to roll into the mid and the late 90s, you know, Transformers got big again with Beast Wars. And then the story line had evolved to a point where it was more mature storytelling. I was a teenager at the time, so I could appreciate the mature storytelling. I felt that franchise, just as X-Men in a way, was also growing at the time, but you know, X-Men, Transformers, Transformers Beast Wars, I mean, Batman, the animated series, all these toy lines were kind of evolving with me, I felt. And Beast Wars, with their amazingly nice CGI, all of a sudden my animation standards went up. So that kind of transitioned us, you know, out of those golden years, those utopian ignorance is bliss years, into something else. But again, you know, everyone has a different feel, right? Some people have an opinion that, you know, the inception of the action figure era in 1964, that has to be the golden age because that was first. That's totally okay. I just don't follow those ages in the exact fashion, like I said earlier, right? I look at that as a genesis and a rise. Maybe I'll do a follow-up video and I'll call it just that, depending on how well this video was received. Maybe I'll do a video on the Renaissance time that we're kind of in now. Maybe I'll talk a bit about the transition part from when Spawn got big. up until right before we started to see more fan-made product. So all that's to say is that I thought this was just a really interesting topic to cover. And when you do think about the good old days of action figures and toys, I almost said action figure collecting, which is another thing I want to get into, and where a part of my mix-up was happening earlier. But you had options galore back then, and options across so many different franchises. Yes, you have options now with your masterpiece type figures and your high-end type figures, but they're starting to converge the number of franchises that are popular. It's not like every good franchise has a cartoon or a TV series associated with it anymore. That part has started to change a little bit, especially as kids start to look at their screens and their devices and whatnot. So, but I think where I kind of got my wires crossed a little bit was that I might be in my own personal era of action figure collecting in terms of the meticulous mindset and the photogenic nature of the toys, the completion nature. Sure, that I might be feeling like I'm approaching or in my peak personally on that, but that doesn't mean that the franchises or that the toys themselves were a golden age, right? I mean, certainly a golden age can refer to harmony, like I mentioned, peacefulness, and in the 80s, you'd get into a bit of a scuttle with your friend at school if they busted up your toy or something, but the innocence was always there. And like I said, like earlier, the simplicity of the toy was always there. Now we kind of have so many opinions out there that I know I've argued with my friends in a friendly, playful manner about what toy is better than what version of a character is better than the other, and so on. But you do see arguments occur just on social media here and there because somebody likes something and somebody else doesn't, and then that analytical mindset sort of just converges in a clash of opinions and a clash of styles, depending on how we collect and what our standards are. And that's perfectly expected in today's day and age. And I guess for that reason, we're kind of out of that utopian mindset and more into the analytical, forward thinking, and as I've said, Renaissance era of action figure mindset. So hopefully I haven't gone way too long here and haven't gotten too far off topic. But again, like I said earlier, I really want to hear what you guys have to say in the comments. What was the golden era? Was it the 78 to 94 time period that Ken is saying? Is it a different era? I know I've asked that more than once here, and that maybe I'm going on way long, but as you can tell, I'm passionate about this, and if you're watching this channel, you're probably passionate about toys as well. So let me know in the comments section. And also, if you're new to the channel, welcome. I should thank my Patreon supporters as well, whose names are in the description of the video. And before I sign off, I just want to say, have a look at some of my other content up here. I'll flash up some clickable links here, and subscribe to the channel if you already haven't. And with that, I'll say goodbye, see you later, and I'm looking forward to hear from you guys. Take care.